Hi, I'm Bucky Stanton, and I'm here today with Andy Russell, professor of history at SUNY Polytechnic and author of Open Standards in the Digital Age, as well as the forthcoming The Innovation Delusion, How Our Obsessions with the New Disrupts the Work That Matters Most, coming out this September. Andy is also co-director of The Maintainers, quote, an interwoven network of communities which, through reflection, research, and advocacy, seeks to achieve a more caring and well-maintained world. Thanks for coming in, Andy.
Thanks for having me, Bucky.
Of course. So, I wanted to bring you in here to discuss kind of this COVID-19 moment and how it's affecting the business cycle and this magical buzzword called innovation. I recently read this MIT article that proclaimed the virus kind of highlights that we can no longer make practical innovations. But at the same time, there's a lot of DIY kind of articles going around talking about making your own things, all these kind of new expressions of technology in the home and in people's local regions. And so I wanted to ask if you could give us kind of how did we get here? How did we get to this moment in technological innovation in the modern economy?
So, really good question, and a really big question that
Mhm.
shop members and anyone interested in technology in general, not just history, but people in business and consumers think about a lot, because innovation has been mercilessly shoved down our throats for decades now. So shop members will know that there's a distinction between invention and innovation that's important. And so um, Lee Vinsel and I in our book, The Innovation Delusion, which should be out soon, we like to also make the distinction not only between invention and innovation, where invention is coming up with something new, and innovation is putting it to profitable, practical use. The other distinction we like to pull out is what we call actual innovation versus innovation speak. Now, actual innovation is is what it sounds like. It's an actual innovation. So, in this era of COVID-19, we could think about actual innovations being vaccines or drug treatments or new forms in organization or business models. To think about the Schumpeter's definition of the term innovation, that generate some good. Usually, profit is what Schumpeter and business analysts have in mind. Innovation speak is a different beast entirely. It's hot air. It's talk about innovation that doesn't have any necessary connection with the actual act of innovation. So we're pretty accustomed to this hot air coming out of places like Silicon Valley. Even before COVID-19, we were well in the throes of a techlash where ordinary people, not just cynical academics like you or me, might be thinking that we're being sold a bill of goods that's not being delivered. So that's, I think, a really important distinction. And we actually are seeing innovation speak live on in people like Mark Andreessen, who just says we should build, or Elon Musk, who says we just need hyperloops. I think those guys, because they're usually guys, are pretty disconnected from the lived experience of people, ordinary people with technology. I would like to think that some of the steam has been taken out of the authority or the cultural status of people like Mark Andreessen or Elon Musk. Not just because it doesn't make sense logically, not because someone has explained actual innovation versus innovation speak, but also because people, I think now more than ever, can look at dreams of a hyperloop or a colony on Mars and say, that's not me. That's really not got much to do with my life. So you mentioned DIY stuff too. I think that's really, there's been a lot of exciting work in our field of history of technology and STS about bottom-up innovation.
Mhm.
Things coming from groups of people, or my advisor Bill Leslie wrote about blue-collar science. Insights coming from the shop floor.
Mm.
And so people are doing that out of necessity, of course. That's always an important source. but also because they know their own circumstances a little bit better and can react to their own constraints. So if it's a mask, if it's a process for, we've got our quarantine box for the mail, and we've got our process for dealing with our groceries and that sort of thing. So people are being clever and even innovative in how they're confronting this
Yeah.
problem.
And so I great reply, but could you just give us just like a very brief kind of historical outline of like, how do we get to this point where Elon Musk are leading huge technical systems and calling that innovation, and we're doing things at home and calling it innovation? How do we get to this? What's just the briefest history of that conceptual separation?
Yeah, so innovation as a term didn't even exist in the modern sense before the 20th century.
Oh,
Innovation
really?
was something that comes from in English from the 16th century.
Hmm.
To innovate was blasphemy in the age of Shakespeare. To do something new was not an admirable trait in a conservative, tradition-bound era.
Mm-hmm.
In the 20th century, particularly after the Second World War, the use of the term really skyrockets. You can use Google's Ngram as a proxy for thinking about this. And innovation and technological innovation become synonymous, especially in the 60s and 70s. Our hypothesis, and other scholars have said this as well, is that innovation became a synonym for progress in an era in the 70s and the 80s when meaningful social progress, the sort that we saw in the 1960s, had kind of drifted a little bit. So as American society in particular became materialistic and techno-obsessed, and the consumer culture trend, which started, or really grew in the 1920s and the 1950s, accelerated in the 1980s, progress means this, for people in our era. It doesn't mean, joining in with one's neighbors to try and govern one's neighborhood. So that's it's really the material fetish and the technological fetish of modern society that led us to this. And of course, treating, people like Elon Musk or Steve Jobs as if they're heroes and sources of moral authority when they're really just really good at making money, using addictive gadgets and services to make money.
And that's so funny. We keep bringing up Elon Musk because today he tweeted out something like, "We need to go back, free America." So, again, even when it's not about technology, he's supposed to be a change maker, and that's such an interesting history. And so you kind of started to get to it, but I'm wondering what approaches we have in the history of technology that you find useful for kind of thinking through these large scale social problems, like I said, that deal with large technical systems, and like your advisors work, these kind of bottom up approaches. So just how do you think through this with the tools we have?
Yeah, so really interesting question. And as a preface, I would say from historiography, not just the history of technology, that there's always a live debate between those who say we need a usable past from history. It can help inform our present moment, and history is just its own thing. It's a fun thing to do. The past is a different country. That school of thought, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we're firmly in the what can we learn, what tools can we use, what's in our toolkit, and I think there's a there, for sure. When my tradition in being exposed to the history of technology starts with Tom Hughes and systems thinking, so the interconnected, complex socio-technical systems. And to think about our world from a Hughesian perspective, I think is really helpful and enriching, whether it's the communication systems that are connecting us right now, the water and power systems that keep us alive, not just entertained, but alive, delivery systems from transportation networks that bring me, stuff I order from online, whatever it is. The interconnectedness of our world that we've seen disrupted because we're all self-quarantined or self-isolating can really be helpfully understood by systems. So that, that's number one, and there's a good reason that's a foundation for our field. Number two is the tradition that is most pronounced in Ruth Cowan's work, and David Edgerton's work as
Mhm.
well, which is about ordinary technologies and domestic technologies, and the amounts of work and effort that go into keeping the house clean, keeping the children fed and at bay, in my case. That's heavily gendered work historically, and there's no real technological fix for that work. More technologies mean more work for mother. That's why the title of Ruth's book is just perfect. Um, and Edgerton's work has really helped Lee and I and a lot of people think about what technology means for most people most of the time. So it's not this bleeding edge stuff. It's not hyperloops. It's the wood table that this computer is on. It's the carpet. It's the walls. It's the sheetrock. It's the pavement. Those are technologies. And when people talk about tech these days, they're usually referring to digital devices, but technology is much broader than that, and it's much more than just the leading edge of things being introduced. It's how they're used, and then how technologies decline and fade away. So those folks are great thinkers, great folks to think with, very relevant to our current predicament.
And what's interesting for both of those replies is they both talk about power in two different ways, right? And the first one kind of explains why Elon Musk is this node that can push whole systems forward and has the power to the godlike power in some ways to suggest, oh, we can just develop a hyperloop. And then Edgerton and Cohen's work really reminds us of, you know, everyday life is the material life of how we move around and how we eat and how we discuss and how we relate to each other, just like in those gendered roles, is vital. And I wanted to ask you, just to close this out, what is most important in regards to technological systems in this moment for you?
For me, it's a really important question. I mean, I'm like anyone. I'm selfish. I want to stay healthy. I want to stay comfortable, and I want the same for my family and the people who are important for me. And so, maintaining those levels of comfort is especially important. I also, like a lot of people, want the fruits of progress that have accumulated over centuries now to be shared as broadly as possible. And it really bothers me that they're not. And so, the place that I think we've seen this most prominently recently has been discussion about essential workers, who are, depending on what state you're in or what town you're in, they're usually nurses, they're usually medical professionals. In New York State, I'm sure you know that liquor stores are essential enterprises. And so, these essential workers are the folks who keep everyday life going. They're typically not paid well, don't have good benefits, don't have good job security, and don't have high social status. So compare that to, the tech bros or the venture capitalists who are the celebrities, the Elon Musk that we keep coming back to Elon. I think my thoughts have been turning consistently to essential workers and what their experience has been like. And it is a very Edgertonian approach to things, right? And it's, informed by labor history and labor studies, which I know is an important source of inspiration for SHOP members and for the STS community as well. So that's what I've been thinking about a lot.
And how do you see that kind of general conversation connecting to your work with the maintainers and kind of questioning or holding up maintenance as this counter to innovation? I mean, I feel like when this started happening and I started seeing so much about essential workers, I thought immediately about your work and how bordering on prophetic it was. I mean, I encountered it first in about 2015 as an undergrad, and I got it, but I continued to kind of get it as I moved through grad school. And then in the last few months, I've again and again, I'm like, wow, that maintenance point is being hammered home every day on the news.
Yeah, it's bittersweet, I think is probably a good word for it.
Yeah.
We've always Lee and I have always said that we hope that the need for us to keep reminding people that maintainers are important, they deserve more compensation, they deserve higher status. We hope that we'll eventually live in a world where we can just stop saying that because the message won't need to get out there. I think we're at a point now, not through our advocacy, just because of the way that this pandemic has unfolded, that there's greater awareness. But I don't see much of a political will to do much about it,
Mm.
right? So that's, there's proposals out about a WPA or a New Deal type organizations. But I guess that story is yet to be told from the federal level anyway. For compensation, but I think for status, I hope that young and old people alike are seeing this, and will see their teachers and nurses and first responders. We saw this with first responders after 9/11. Actually, that the status kind of changed. Compensation didn't, and John Stewart, told us all about that when he went to Congress last year. But I hope that will change, because I think we're seeing now more than ever, we don't want to be disrupted. There's a lot of things in this world that we want maintained.
Hmm.
There's a lot of things that we need to preserve. And there's people who are working really hard all the time, putting their lives on the line to do it.
Yeah, and I thank you so much, Andy, for coming in and talking about and revealing how this, technology and innovation are these huge, multi-layered, interrelated uh, flows and structures in our society that are governed and have their own agencies, and really engaging in this depth, but also really always pointing your work towards a clear and popular goal. So thank you so much for coming in and talking on technology stories.
Thank you, Bucky. Take care.